Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
All right, this is Todd Atkins. I'm back with Miguel Iturrate, and we're back for another MMA Conspiracy Hour. We're going to kind of talk about PFL's shift to a tournament format. Basically, they bought Bellator and then switched to their format while kind of losing a lot of Bellator's best fighters in the process. But as always, we hope you submit to or subscribe to the channel, share it with people, like the videos. That helps us out, and I want to give Miguel a chance to kind of start with his opening thoughts on, this shift in strategy by the PFL.
Right, Bellator format was 3 fights in 3 months, and this is 3 fights in 5 months. But it's an elimination tournament, so it's different than the point tournament or the point system the PFL's been using till now. But I don't think it's enough of a difference. It's basically amounts to the same things, and unless they address other problems in the structure of the company, they're going to have similar problems to the ones they've had all along. If you are an 8-man tournament with 2 alternates, and let's say nobody gets injured, then how do you keep the alternates busy? How do 2 alternates work? Do you fight the alternates every single show? The same alternates fight, because you need an alternate in every show, right? So
it's not going to be the same weight class, so no, that wouldn't happen.
Well, but for the so there's an alternate fight on the 8-man level of the tournament. At some point, that tournament goes to the 4-man level.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with those 2 alternates that fought in the first show? Are they going to repeat and do the rematch again as alternates for the next show? Because you need alternates for that tournament as
well. Are the alternates even going to fight? I think they're just going to be on standby.
Then that's an even bigger problem, because you've got fighters in a fight organization that are not fighting, and that's really been the big criticism of both companies throughout, Bellator and PFL. With Bellator, you had situations where they would ramp up, and I'd have to look back at the calendar to give you exact dates and stuff, but I remember vividly they would do 3 shows in a month and then take 2 months off. That's not how you run a fight company. That's not running to these tournaments like the way Bellator did. Every single company from the UFC on down to every other company that ever set up tournaments eventually stopped doing tournaments, because the amount of X factors and problems that come up there, that you have to be incredibly flexible as an organization in order to take care of those problems on a consistent basis. What happens if the main guys get hurt? What happens if there are guys who lose in the first round that are promising, that are now going to sit for 6 months because you don't have fights for them? Everything becomes a headache, and none of the changes that they're claiming to make appear to me to be solutions to the ultimate problem, which is they need to be doing. This is the NFL or baseball. There is no off season in this sport. Every fighter has downs. You can't compete every couple of months. Maybe some guys like a Kevin Holland and Cerrone could get away with it for a short period of time, fighting frequently. But most fighters are not going to want to do them. Not in the long run. I mean, and a lot of times that's driven by finances also. And also by, you're younger in your career, I happen to be probably a little more physically able to do that, bounce back. It's for something recent where, with all the time that's gone by, John Jones is 38 years old, and John Jones, he's got money, so he has access to physical trainers of a different level, but he had a guy that put him on a hydrogen water therapy, and he says it took away he had trouble like getting out of bed at times and body soreness and body aches and stuff like that. And not everybody's going to be able to afford that, but young men will recover from that. So in the beginning of your career, you could fight maybe 4 or 5 times a year if you're lucky and grab a few paydays, right? But the PFL doesn't have the structure or the amount of shows for a young fighter. They're going to be having to concentrate on the guys that are a little bit bigger names and a little bit bigger recognition. So those are the guys that are going to get the roster spots. So without ramping up to more shows and having, and the one thing you didn't see the UFC do also, and this is one of those interesting things to me. You didn't see like the PFL and these companies, they start, they struggle. Is it going to be called the Grand Prix? We're not going to use Grand Prix. We want to use global tournament. Then we're going to have our champions shows. Don't label the damn things. The UFC has UFC fight nights numbered, and that's it. You don't need special names for it. Every once in a while, you get the main event guys a special name, and in the old days, they went through it already, and they tried, Grudge Night or whatever the fight shows were called. They stopped doing that. Pay-per-views 311, UFC fight nights 200 something. There are other Vegas shows in the Apex. Just make shows. Don't worry about naming them.
Yeah, I think
And
it's
don't worry.
UFC Apex is what they call those.
Yeah, don't worry about naming them, labeling them, or trying to fit everything into a box. You can just have shows, and that's what you're going to need. Keep a real roster happy. Half the guys that were Bellator that left is because they didn't get fights, and they had no hope of getting fights. And I saw we could talk about what Ariel said about the red pill stuff here in a bit, but it's all about if you're a fight show, your fighters need to be fighting.
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to be the challenge. I mean, I talked to Sean Wheelock about this kind of message, and one thing he said was tournaments fall apart. They did for Art Davie, they did for Bjorn Rebney, they did for Scott Coker, did for Pride. That's the challenge. Because he worked for Bjorn Rebney during that time.
They fall apart, and for many, many different reasons. Like I said, the guys that lose are still going to want to fight, and you may still have, you may have a tournament favorite losing the first round, so you had him signed to a contract with other fights. He's going to be on the phone saying, "What? Well, when's my next fight?" This is not this. The fact is, it's surprising to people, or that people don't seem to figure this out. Um, we're only going to do tournaments. Okay, so if you're only going to do tournaments, what is that guy going to do? That's it, because that's not how you use assets. Especially you're trying to build name recognition. You got to roll these guys out there.
Yeah, it's gonna be a major challenge, and we'll get to the red pill thing now, since people probably wonder what we're talking about. Errol Hawani had mentioned that Scott Coker had signed a number of guys, the more well-known guys, champion, to very large contracts right before the sale happened, and he was wondering why Don Davis hadn't come out and said that, and I think Errol probably knows better, but I think in hindsight he probably should have thought about the fact that if Don Davis did come out and say that this had happened, it would make Don Davis look bad because they didn't catch it in their due diligence, and they never should have, in some ways they never should have bought the company if that was the case, or if they couldn't have sustained those contracts, they should have dealt with that before they bought the company. These are all things that would have made Don Davis look bad, and I'll let Miguel kind of expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're going to buy Bellator, again, we were joking offline, but what was Scott Coker doing? 2 days before the actual handover of the company, and he was gone forever. 2 days before, he's you know calling in his fighters and signing them to these huge contracts, like Joe Biden signing pardons, kind of thing. At the last moment, and nobody can stop him. There's your problem. Joe Biden, not to get into politics, but Joe Biden's the president and has certain powers up until the last moment, so he's executing those. The fact that Viacom and Scott Coker felt they had the power to sign these contracts to begin with is an indictment of the PFL and Don Davis. There should have been, and his lawyers. And here's the problem: is Don Davis, under no circumstances has he fooled anybody into believing he's an MMA guy. Right? What he is a businessman, an investor, a guy who understands business, is trying to, take a fight company, run it like a business, and make money. Okay, understandable. And where were his lawyers here? Why was there not some type of moratorium or a situation where 30 days before the exchange, Scott Coker, no new contract, 60 days or whatever that time period is. The fact that PFL's lawyers didn't catch that is a major problem. Those lawyers should be fired. Now, and the fact that Don Davis didn't catch it, him being the guru businessman that he tries to present himself as, is unconscionable. And I think what happened in this situation is Viacom's lawyers, Viacom is a company almost on par with the UFC in terms of money and stuff. So Viacom's lawyers were not joke lawyers. They probably were sitting there in the room going, I can't believe that there's no safety net for these guys to avoid this type of thing. And at the end of the day, people say, Coker sometimes comes across as doing things that make you think, oh, maybe he works for the UFC or something. I don't think, at the end of the day, I look at it a little bit differently. I think Coker, I don't think Coker was a super great executive. Obviously, he lasted longer than I did, so I'm I you
But you
can
weren't in
take that
charge
with
of Bo Dog, so I mean that's not comparable. You were a matchmaker.
I guess you could call me talent relations. So I mean, I had certain powers over contracts and things, but um, but I appreciate that. But my point is I don't think Coker was sitting there diabolically thinking I'm going to destroy the PFL. You know what I mean? It's like I think he is a guy that at the end of the day falls on the side of fighter person. And I think more of what these contracts were is him trying to take care of guys that he had not had a chance to take care of yet, trying to do two guys that worked hard for him a solid. I get accused of overpaying at times. I guess, in my career, I guess he's being accused of overpaying on those contracts now and trying to make them look bad. But a lot of the times, if you had a guy fighting for $2,000 for a set of fights, a handful of fights, and he's been doing great work, and you give him a decent raise, it's also a little bit of the coverage to the back end. A guy like Gegard Mousasi is rumored to be one of the bigger contracts. Look at the guy's record. He's got 50-something fights, and he hasn't made big money for all 50-something fights. He actually made really small money for the majority of them, you know? He's been in big shows. I mean, Pride, well, now that we look back at it and you understand the sport, Pride's $30,000 paydays look great when the UFC was paying 2 and 4. But at the end of the day, you can't live, 30,000 taxes. Your trainer, you're getting about 12 grand a fight. It's not huge money, even in those paydays. So he was with the UFC for a little bit. Maybe Bellator took care of him, and he netted a few $100,000 paydays. But Gegard Mousasi's a guy who's paid his dues, and I could see what Coker's trying to do for him. It's like, hey, I'm gonna do something. Hopefully, it works out, And his lawyers are telling him that the other guys don't have a safety net, so they're gonna buy him. The minute those contracts were signed, when the PFL reviewed them, if they weren't happy with them, the deal should have been shelved. You don't buy the company. You don't buy the company when Viacom cannot find another buyer for Bellator. They will come back with a much lower price.
Yeah, if you don't get the best guys, what's the value of it? Besides raising the funds like you had talked about. That could be the value. If you get 100, 200 million from somebody in Qatar, then maybe that's the value. But not getting the best guys makes it worth basically nothing unless you can raise money off of it.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it is the purchase doesn't make sense when you don't utilize the best assets that came with Bellator. And they've almost to a man let all the best assets go.
Yeah, they bought a company and then they let all the best fighters possibly go to the UFC or GFL.
And it
That's
looks like
double the damage. It's like a double shot to the face. You pay all the money and then you lose all your guys to the competition.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what GFL does. I think GFL in the same boat as the PFL. Kind of following a failed format from the past and not looking at the one true format, which is
Right.
the UFC's format. So, for example,
But the last thing you want to do is give the UFC more good fighters that you don't have.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I noticed I saw something interesting too. Um, just things that come to mind about silly things that the PFL does wrong. I saw a 3 or 4 minute YouTube promo for next year, and I'm sitting there watching it, and the idea of it was that the fighters are like, one, you're the one, I'm the one, and I'm like, that's another fight organization's name, dummies. They're using. So I for a minute was like, am I watching a one promo or am I watching a PFL promo? And then they don't want to use the Grand Prix name, even though Grand Prix really comes from car racing kind of thing, and it's been used by many companies because they say it's a Bellator format, and then they come out with a promo that says one, has every fighter saying the word one, and then fading into some highlights. They're very confused. And again, the one true format that's out there is UFC avoided a disaster last night where they actually put Makachev in the ring against a replacement opponent, at least got their main event in, and Makachev got his paycheck, so Makachev won't be complaining. Um, they elevated the Brazilian kid who at least can save him a shot. He did the company a favor. He goes back out and wins 2 or 3 more. He may even get another shot at some point, because he's in good graces with them. I don't know what happens to Sarukian. Um, it's
Dana
going to
White
depend.
said, "Oh, that's another thing we can kind of talk about in the post fight." He said he's not getting the next title shot, and he actually said we'll see what happens next year for him.
Yeah,
I don't know if he meant that, but does he mean he's not getting the title shot at least till 2026?
they have the roster to do that, which means
Yeah.
that they could find 2 or 3 other guys that will get in there with Makachev, make it a reasonable fight that they can promote. And again, yeah, Sarukian looks good, and he had a good amount of hype around him and stuff. But at the end of the day, he's another Eastern European guy. I'm sure that they'd rather get a couple of American guys in the ring, for just a mix and see how it goes. Um, but I again, that has to do with the roster. If Moicano had not done the fight, then maybe Darius would have. And they could go through the guys on the roster on the fight there, gone ahead. Then if none of them, if they all turned it down for whatever reason, then you go to the boxing commission and see whose licenses and medical paperwork are up to date, and see if you've got anyone available that you can bring in. The UFC has that level of flexibility. And if it hadn't worked out and Makachev had to sit out yesterday, he could probably set up a fight in a couple of weeks with somebody new. But also, it will be forgotten because next week they have a show.
Yeah. The thing was, I think Dana White had said he kind of hinted, because he said we took them to see our specialists at the PI, we took Sarukian here, and he seemed to think Sarukian could have fought and should have fought, and the fact that he didn't rubbed him the wrong way, And he
Yeah, when
said
we've seen
flat
that
out he's
happen
not
before.
getting the next title shot. He said that flat out.
We've seen that happen before, and when you try to march to the beat of your own drum in the UFC, you run this risk. We've seen guys. We've seen guys. If Dana's happy with you, there's a payoff. If Dana becomes unhappy with you, then for whatever reason, yes, you can make things happen and make things not happen for you. And it's unfortunate that this happened. That he felt he was too hurt to fight. I don't. There's not much in what the guy's resume and personality looks like that would tell me that he would chicken out at the last minute. At the end of the day, is that do you want to fight 80% in the title fight against that guy? So it's a consideration that um, maybe in the best case scenario, Dana would be more neutral about it, but Dana's not. We know, but Dana's not neutral. Dana's, you know, going to have his opinion, and that's what is going to be the overriding factor. So Sarukian may have hurt his career, may almost definitely hurt his career then, if that's the case. But the point is even if Makachev had not fought, in a couple of weeks they could have put him in the ring against somebody else. And also, in order for fans to forget and fans to see product, you've got another UFC in a week, and another UFC in 2 weeks, and another UFC in 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, it's well forgotten that Makachev didn't fight. So that's the power of what the UFC does. That these other guys, these other companies, are like, well, we're going to do. Again, the PFL's new format sees the shows. Sees them talking about how the tournaments are going to end in August, in the August time frame. My immediate question is okay, does that mean what? That you're taking, like the NFL, you're taking 4 months off so that you can reset for the tournaments in 2026? Or you can have shows till the end of the year? Do you have weekly shows? What is going on there? Again, they don't have a show next week, but they have a show in 2 weeks, a show in 3 weeks, a show in 4 weeks, a show in 5 weeks. See what the UFC does? So all of a sudden, even if Makachev had not fought, he could either pop up on one of those shows, he do the main event, or in 2 weeks we got the plus of Strickland too. Talk about Sarukian would be gone. Meanwhile, the other companies don't have that capacity. So when they lose a main event, when they have a fighter who's not fighting, these guys actually legitimately have to sit. There's no options for them to give these guys fighters. And that's always going to be the bugaboo of these companies that think that they don't need to fight shows every week. It's not a seasonal sport. This is a sport where each fighter has his own season, and you've got to be in tune with that.
Yeah, but they do. They'll have their Challenger Series. They'll have the Europe shows, so maybe they can generate more content that way.
Are they ready to do 48 shows next year? They already lost the first 3 weeks of January with no shows.
Mm-hmm.
We have their big show coming up in 6 days that they're thinking about maybe airing on YouTube, which is cool. Maybe they'll get more eyes on it. But when do the tournaments start after that? Do we know when the tournaments start?
Yeah, I think they'd be better off to try and get, like you said, try and get on whatever is willing to carry them that can get the most eyes. Who cares if it's pay-per-view? We don't. Just get in front of as many people.
It was not it. It was definitely not it for them.
Get in front of as many people as you can. Let me ask you this: as a matchmaker, that's what you did. 200 plus shows on. How damaging is it for PFL to lose guys like Pico, probably Masasi already, Pitbull already, maybe Johnny Eblen will go. These are Usman or Magomedov. Probably down the road is going to go to the UFC most likely. We can't count him out because he does have a fight in PFL come up. But how damaging is it to lose a large pool of talent like that when you're a promotion that's kind of trying to come up?
It's bad. I'll get into that in a second. So, in 6 days, we've got their big January 25th show that they've been, trying to get hyped up for. And they announced tournament changes, right? So now it's this January 25th. What the UFC would have done is they would have said, tournaments are starting February 1st, folks. What the PFL's website says, tournaments coming in April. You're literally going to have 2 or 3 months of no fights going on in the organization. You can't stay in the public eye or expect to catch the public's imagination without putting a consistent product out in front every day. I always go back to this, so people who listen to us a lot, may be tired of me hearing it, but I can't stress it enough. After Bonner and Forrest Griffin did their major fight, the end of Tough Season 1, the very next week they had Couture and Liddell too. And within the next 3 weeks after that, they had Ortiz versus Shamrock. So they were putting consistent big fights, people that want to see, and those in between already back then, and they haven't stopped or let up. they've only ramped up to do what is now looks like between 48 and 50 shows every year. And that's the key to it. If people are going to watch fights, they're going to watch fights. You put it on TV, you turn down the volume, and you watch the fights. You hope something exciting happens. They get their imagination on there. They do it the next week, and there's your show again, and there's your show again. They're doing their big show in January and not using it to promote fights 3 months later with nothing in between. It's no wonder the UFC doesn't even care about what these companies are doing.
Yeah. Now let's get back to what I had at.
Yeah, the talent.
Yeah.
Ariel Helwani in his talk spoke about how these guys are going to fill their the championship spots. And it's one of the things that we started to do early in our career at the hook and shoot level, which definitely was a regional grassroots level show. But I tried to crown all the champions in all the weight classes in a short period of time. And then I started, in my mind, the strategy was great. Just you find a better fighter, you bring him in, get him a match or two, and put him in the title shot, which was our format back then, and you continue to upgrade. You have to have the best fighters possible, especially if you think you're going to compete with the UFC. You have this John Davis making claims of how several of the top 15 fighters belong to the PFL, and that's not the case. That's not the case, especially when it comes to name recognition. They let half the name recognition guys go. If Patricio Ferrer, if you have a guy better than him, then cutting Ferrer is not the right way to go. The right way to go was put him in the ring with your guy and have your guy beat him, and at least that way you get the rub. And you get activity, and you don't have Ferrer crapping on your company in public. It's all kinds of benefits to it, but you need they're especially again they're the ones that say they're going to be a global company and this or the other thing. You need more fighters and more roster, not less, and they just let their upper talent go. Maybe more bad contracts, so there are business reasons for it. Again, explore why you bought the company with the bad contracts. So everything hints at mismanagement. Musasi, I guess, is probably close to 40 at this point. He's not the young gun he was back in the old days, kind of thing. And he never became the huge crossover name he had the talent to be. But he should be serviceable for a fight or two. He should be somebody you can bring in. And again, you don't want to look like hook and shoot circa 1998 in terms of the guys competing. Some of them are have other jobs. They don't. You want guys that look like athletes. Eye test thing when you're into sport and stuff is very important. You know, I did a show here in Costa Rica with local fighters, and the local fighters they give their all. They're real tough and stuff. And we were selling tickets on the beach, and we had a few American guys show up, and they watched 2 fights and they left because it doesn't look the same. You have to put an appealing product on there. I imagine at this point they're going to fill their 8-man tournaments with guys that meet a certain level of appeal. This is exactly the point. Is Ferrer, Masasi, guys of that level, they're beyond the tournament. So this would have been a perfect example or a perfect way for you to do a different fight show series without the tournament format. Now they married themselves to the tournament format. Those guys could have fought February 8th on a show, 2 weeks after the January 25th show, instead of waiting to April to launch their next shows. And if they're not, we'll lose money on the shows, then this guy's not the businessman he says he is. If his only way of getting money is to get hit from rich people and sock it away and then just pay out and you're not getting other income flows, how are you going to get income flows if you're actually not doing fight shows? Every fight show should be a nexus for income in some way, shape, or form. Put together a good fight card, go back to any way you can to get eyes on it, and eventually the crowds will come. But you have to be willing to sacrifice, like the UFC did to get themselves. I wonder The numbers I heard for the Ngannou pay-per-view, when he finally fought in the PFL, are woeful. Are woeful. Under 100,000 pay-per-views sold. So no wonder they, again, it may be short-sighted, but they're actually saying that they're going to give up on the pay-per-view format, right? No, the pay-per-view format should be something that you built your fighters up for, so that you can present the best matches, and eventually the number starts to go up. And one day you got guys that have captured the imagination of the public, and your pay-per-view numbers blow up, and then you never go below 3 or 4 or 500,000 like the UFC does. The UFC also in the early days had very bad numbers. Or off pay-per-view, being shown only in small states, doing shows in war memorials. And these guys want a shortcut. They haven't paid their dues. And without those dues paid, the muscle memory of the audience for this isn't going to be there for you.
Right. And you're
So
right
to me,
about the
the number
schedules too, because like what you're getting back at about the schedule. I'm looking at the UFC schedule, for example. 1, 2, 3, 4 shows in February. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 shows in March. 2 shows in June already. You know, it's like you're saying. They just got the content.
and trust me, the shows in May and April that aren't listed there, if they're not listed yet, they're on a whiteboard somewhere in the UFC offices.
Right.
It's not like a great mystery of like, oh, we forgot April. But that was what made Bellator a B class product. That they would do 3 shows in 3 weeks and then sit for 2 months, 3 months. You have if you're going to capture people, imagination. The UFC, when they turn on fighting, why is the UFC synonymous? Because yes, all their history and all, but it's also the way they operated. So now, anytime you turn on fighting on television, almost anywhere in the world, it's probably going to be a UFC product, or it's going to be other. Nobody's got that identity. Maybe one in Asia has that identity where they're also up there and stuff like that. But anything else looks like, and in most cases, you can tell just by looking at the fighters if they're UFC fighters or not, because those companies are forced to use guys that are younger, more amateurish, not as polished, not as athletic.
You know, and the other thing, I just want to get back to this for that I covered 11 shows over basically 3 months. PFL, 1 show in January, 0 in February, 0 in March. Then they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 shows from April, May, June, July, August over the 5 months. 9. You see 11 shows over the next 3 months.
Yeah. You can't compare. And again, the key to that is it's not just do shows for the sake of doing shows. There is a management aspect to it. You're trying to maintain and keep a roster operational. You're never going to be 100% with everybody on your roster. There's always going to be some people there that are not happy, not content with their contract. Some people who had an injury that they weren't handling well. Some people who realize that maybe they're not getting the backing on the merchandising and marketing end, so they retire early. You're never going to be 100% happy with your roster, but you can definitely do a better job than both the PFL and Bellator did in keeping their roster active and happy.
Mm-hmm.
It involves fighters fighting. If you're a John Jones or a Conor McGregor, and it's your fault you're not fighting, so be it. And Dana has to deal with that too, because Dana, has wanted to get them in the cage and has not been able to, But if you're not those guys and you want to fight and you can't fight, that's the organization's fault. And Dana doesn't have that problem anywhere near to the level of extent of these other companies. And he has it under control. And like Michael Chandler, maybe in private, may have been like, "Fuck, man, I wish I hadn't sat for a year and a half waiting for Connor and this, that, and the other stuff." Maybe in private, but he's not out in public tapping on your company the way everybody does to these PFL people. So they have just no management of their name. So in public, if you're somebody who watches, news clips and things like that, and all you see is fighters complaining about it, why would you even tune into a PFL show?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a. I mean, I don't want people thinking we're just out here to beat up on the PFL all the time, but Miguel keeps hammering at home the points that are important is the not having enough content and not, to not keep the best fighters from Bellator and inject them into your product.
And operate on a misplaced arrogance that makes you kind of demand to be treated as an equal to the UFC or a near equal or future competition. They just have not uh, operated that way, so I can't behave that way with them.
Right.
I'm not going to make pretend that they are going to be dangerous to the UFC anytime soon, especially when they keep, blunder after blunder going on. Who's on this January 25th card?
For PFL?
Yeah.
It's
So here's the big question for me. There's really only one guy we care about on this freaking roster. So is Ngannou on this one? It's already been a few months since we saw him. No, Ngannou's not on this card. Why would that be? Why would you have an asset like Ngannou, who's aging also, who came through a fight completely unscathed before? Yeah, you may not have a great opponent for him, but the guy they originally had turned out to obviously not have been a totally prepared opponent and stuff like that. And Ngannou's your biggest name. So he should have been on this card, Road to Dubai. So again, there's another indication of what Don Davis does is he goes to people with exorbitant amount of money that are looking to make investments, and he somehow is able to convince them that his is a viable investment. I wish they would listen to our podcast because it can save them a lot of money.
I mean, Nurmagomedov versus Hughes, also Vadim Nemkov, I think he's going to leave after this fight. I think he had already, and he's one of their very best fighters too.
So he should have been fighting in Ghana. Yeah. No? Nemkov is a heavyweight, right? I mean, unless I'm wrong on that.
I think he's a light heavyweight, actually.
Okay.
But he can fight at heavyweight. Yes, he has fought at heavyweight.
So it's been 3 months since we've seen Ngannou fight. Like I said, Ngannou was in a 3-minute fight. He came through completely unscathed. Maybe Ngannou would say, "Nah, I don't want to fight just yet because of the calendar and stuff." But he's 38 years old. He's getting a good contract from the PFL because he signed a good contract. I'm sure he would take the payday, especially against a guy who really isn't going to be on his level. So, and Nemkov is a heavyweight according to this. He's fighting a guy named Johnson, which I think is Tim Johnson. Yeah, Tim Johnson was 18-10. So you got a guy 18-2. Yeah, he's 205 on the weight class, but he's fighting Johnson, who's a heavyweight. Maybe they were, like I said, there's no way. Respect to Tim Johnson. He's 18-10 in his career. He's a professional fighter. He's got a lot of fights. Obviously, a tough guy, a credible heavyweight that I would keep on the roster, but he doesn't deserve to be in a co-main event with the resume he has. Meanwhile, you've got Ngannou, who you could have put Nemkov in there for. And again, Nemkov, maybe he's lightweight. You're bringing him up. Maybe it's scary, because Ngannou is such a big, scary guy and stuff. But Nemkov is a Russian. I'm sure we can make this fight happen. Look at what Makhachev said about taking this fight on one day's notice yesterday. That's the attitude these other guys have. So you bump this guy's paycheck up a little bit and tell him, look, all we need, you don't even need to win, a good performance, and we've got a follow-up contract for you so that you don't leave. And, we put you on the path for the 205 belt. If you want to go back to 205, why would you present for the first part of the year? We haven't seen the show since October. Why would you present undercard fights as semi-main events? I like the main event. They like the main event. Hopefully, it's a title fight in some way, shape, or form. But why would it? Again, after Ngannou in October came through a 3-minute fight unscathed, why you wouldn't put him on this card? Conscionably stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I mean, I'd like to see it. Like I said, I like the Bjorn's tournament product, and before when it started, they didn't have any really notable fighters. They were built in that tournament format, Pitbull, Pat Curran, Ben Askren, Chandler, Alvarez. They had a lot of guys who made a name in this tournament format. That's just a few of them. They had a lot of other guys too. Storm Slamenko was one. Koreshkov. I can go on and on about guys that that
Yeah,
that
Lima.
nobody knew. Douglas Lima for sure. By the way, he just signed with GFL too, so they didn't get him either. That's what I'm talking about. So many guys they're losing, but these are all guys who were not. They didn't come from UFC or anywhere else. I mean, they did. They
The
had
tournament.
fights. They had fights before. Some of them didn't. Chandler didn't, but
Don't
they
get
were
me wrong.
made in Bellator. They were made in that
And
format.
this sport was made on that format because if we had to wait to see Hoist Gracie 2 months, 3 months, and not win 3 fights in a row in one night, then maybe the sport wouldn't be here. And the tournament format does have a way of um, accelerating the start, making stars.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
The fact with the 3 fights in one night, with all the X factors involved, there you would have alternates without having to worry about working with alternates over time. You would have alternates that you could fight without having alternates that are not fighting. Um, Almost doing all the fights in one night is safer proposition than doing them over a period of time. Over a period of time, you can't send it, we're going to do a show every 4 or 5 months. No, you got to compress the time. And that does it. So, in other words, everybody who advances in the first round of the tournament is going to go into their second fight of the tournament and their final fight of the tournament without a complete training camp. Why? Because they just don't have enough time for what would be a complete 8 to 12 month 8 to 12 week training camp. The way that this sport operates at the highest level, so you're already messing up that format, and that who knows what happens? They come in overtrained, undertrained, not happy with their training, psychologically not ready, not used to the cycle and stuff like that. In doing them all in one day, actually may be a safer proposition and is a better way to build stars. And you see that you had Mark Coleman in a tournament that he won after 2 fights because at the end of the day they couldn't get a third guy in there. Then you have the anomaly, and again a tough guy who you have to respect as from a history perspective and a pioneer. But you've got the anomaly of Steve Jenham winning a tournament.
Right.
You know what I mean? So from right away, the tournament format is something that it has a place to be used, but you have to use it properly. I still think, like I just mentioned, that all in one day is actually the best way to do the tournament. You can't bring them back in a week because they bruise their hand's still bruised. They broke their hand, then they're not going to be able to fight. But on the same day, with adrenaline going on, with you know doctors active, with the fighters in the mindset that they're going to have to perform several times in the same day, you actually eliminate and maybe have less X factors there.
Yeah, and I think there's
So
some guys that they have that this could potentially, Usman being one of them. I mean, obviously, some people already know who he is. Paul Hughes, who just beat AJ McKee. AJ McKee was one of those guys who came through the Bellator tournament format before. So I think they have a guy, Shamil Musayev, who's, I think maybe has one loss, 18, 19 wins. Outstanding fighter. I think he's probably one of the better fighters in the world at his weight. Yeah, they have some guys who could probably break out through this tournament format where you see them once every few weeks, every month or every month and a half.
And you've got them going out there, and the problem here is it's not the UFC also because the UFC has depth where a guy ranked 13 could be very dangerous to the guys ranked 2 and 3 if he's an up and coming guy like that. They've got guys like that. In the PFL, the top guys are going to be going like Ngannou did with Renan. Uh, just not the same level.
Hmm.
It's not the same level. So you can say, oh, they'll have padded records and stuff like that, but there's an advantage to having people come on and have fights where the fighters look efficient and the fighters do their job. If I put you in a little bit of a mismatch and you're supposed to win, now go out and win. And that will build your name. And you can do that, but then you'd like to see the guy, oh, I saw this guy a couple of months ago or whatever. Oh, okay, this guy again, this guy again. That effect PFL format doesn't have.
Right, but that's what I'll push it back on a little bit because, like I said, with the UFC, if you watch, let's say you're a new fan and you watch a card and you see somebody have a great performance, you really liked watching that person. You may not see him again for 3, 4, 5 months, you know. But with this tournament format, the guy who wins, you're going to see him this month, next month, the month after. In Bellator's format, I think it'd be like a month and a half. But you're going to see them 3, 4 times over a short period of time. You're going to see them several times. The UFC don't really get that anymore.
Yeah, well, looking at it from that perspective, you have a point. But the problem is that again, the UFC's machine is that if you're that one guy that you want to see again, then inevitably in the next couple of days, couple of weeks, in the time period around it, you've seen also an oh shit, I want to see him fight that guy. That's what you are not going to have in this PFL format. As guys keep losing, they're gone. You don't see them, and eventually you've got the winner like Ngannou with no opponent, nobody to fight, and nobody ready on the roster. That's what the UFC that goes back to the original point of consistency of having shows every week, where you could see it happening from back in the early days. Mike Brown, Uriah Faber, Dominic Cruz, uh, that weight class, which was very also brought in from I think it was a WFA or WEC or one of those other
Mm-hmm.
groups, but
WC.
Jose Aldo was in that group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if one week you see Jose Aldo and then the next week you see Uriah Faber, then you're thinking to yourself, that's a fight I want to see. And then when they deliver the fight, you've got that because they're putting out a lot of product. This tournament format, you're going to have 4 guys gone in the first round. Then you're going to have down to 2 guys. And then what? Your best 2 guys, you can't rematch them right away. Maybe if you have an incredible fight, you can do one rematch. But it's not like, well, they're going to fight again. They're going to fight again. You know, where is the competition for those guys? Where are you building up the next level of guys?
You're
Or
building
are
up
you going to
the
be
challenger for the champion
yeah?
through those
And
tournaments.
if the way you think you're going to do it is then when you get to 2026, there'll be a new crop of guys. Then what? Your champions are going to sit. Yeah, they say they're going to have a champion series, but then you wind up with things like Nemkov versus Tim Johnson, which, maybe by skewing the weight classes a little bit and putting Nemkov, who's a light heavyweight, up, he makes 205, so he's probably 230, 225, right? So he's got a heavyweight, a smaller heavyweight's potential. And Johnson's a 260 pounder. So maybe with the size difference, you've created something that could be that looks a little more appealing. It's kind of not fair. You're really kind of not being fair to Johnson either, putting him in against a guy who's got more talent and more upside than him. And you're not doing Nemkov that much of a favor either. Again, and who is Nemkov going to fight? Where is the next? I should be able to look next week and look at the fights on the light heavyweight division or the heavyweight division and say, okay, this guy here is 18-3. That might be a great fight one day. That might be here. Again, now I'm going to wait till April to see who the next fight show is.
Yeah, the downtime between tournaments is a negative. They're going to have to address that somehow. Maybe they spread the tournaments out, have this weight, this weight, this weight, this weight, kind of so they can have it go more over the year.
See, this is another reason the weight that the tournaments kind of bite you in the butt is inevitably. So if the opening show, say, is the lightweight tournament, 155 pounders, then you've eaten up 4 or 5 fights at 155. You can't sustain the other parts of the roster having most of your fights in one weight class. And the next show is all light heavyweights, and the next show is all heavyweights, and the next show is all middleweights, and then you got lightweights again. You know,
Yeah.
it's no way to sustain the roster because now you're married to the tournament. Where are the middleweights not in the tournament who you're developing going to fight?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm interested to see what them try it because, like I said, I was a big fan of the Rebney Bellator. I watched it every Thursday.
Hopefully, they get some smoking tournaments that we enjoy and can actually say, like I was thinking, we talked about some of those
I need to
the
look at the
Uriah
dates.
Favors, the Mike Browns, 135-pound guys, and back in its day, if Bellator, I think one of the Frere brothers started out in that weight class. They had Joe Warren. They got, there were a few guys that would have made very interesting fights with the UFC if they had gotten onto the UFC roster. But they kept Joe Warren busy. Now, if these guys got to sit, then they're inevitably going to wind up going to the UFC under the UFC's flag, and you put no. He likes to. Ron Davis challenged Dana to a cross promotion for doing Jones and Ngannou again. That was his great idea. Why in the world would he do that? Actually, Dana's on record as saying he's working on a fight that fall of next year that nobody can see coming, but that's an amazing crossover fight that he's excited about. So we'll see what Dana delivers. It'll be interesting. When he does things like that, it's usually something. Um, yeah, like he actually delivers when he makes promises.
Yeah, also, I think, I've seen they have some of the shows on Friday, but then the ones in June, a couple of them are going to be on Saturday. They need to keep it on one day that's not competing against UFC. Thursday, Friday, one of those 2 days. They cannot be doing
Competing,
shows on Saturday. That's a mistake.
yeah, competing against the UFC is another hour to hour, day to day. Not a good idea. You're absolutely right. They
Yeah.
should have picked Friday and just stuck with Friday. You know, in the past, there've been franchises like even the UFC. I think they did Tuesday nights, Wednesday night, like Wednesday night fights. For a while, or Dana White's Contender Series was on a Wednesday night, or you had the Ultimate Fighter on an odd night and things like that. They understood the more fights, the better. And this is like that's why the point system and the tournament format to me is really no different unless they're addressing the core issue, which is this is not a seasonal sport. You've got to have shows every week to begin to capture the public's imagination. Going from January 25th to April to start your tournaments with nothing in between, you have no shot.
Yep. And you can't run on Saturday either. It's got to be a different
You
day.
you've got you're limited. You can't run on Saturday, and you shouldn't have your first big show of the year. You put it on television somehow. Put it on YouTube is always YouTube is you can dress it up and say it'll have access people to see it for free, etc., etc., etc. But if you're not negotiating a contract for a major distribution, then and YouTube's going to be your distribution, it'll be a short period of time before they're asking you to pay for a subscription for the shows, and people just won't.
Yeah, and I think if somehow they could get on Netflix before the UFC, that'd be a big coup. But
Yeah, if you were Netflix, why would you take them?
I know. Well, because it'd be cheaper. And Netflix might think, hey, we can put this product over. We have we have all the subscribers in the world. Whatever we put on here works. They've done all these odd shows. Squid Game. What the heck is that? It's hugely popular. They have stuff that nobody's heard of that's popular. Because
I
enough people.
understand that.
Paul versus Tyson's a prime example. They put this garbage on Netflix. How many people watch that?
Yeah, yeah.
More than the
The,
UFC
the,
could ever dream of having watching. one of their shows ever.
No, but every one of those shows, I think Squid Games was developed in South Korea and had a big audience in South
Yeah,
Korea,
right, right,
which is a
right.
big TV market. And I think Jake Paul and Mike Tyson have name recognition.
Okay.
Yeah, you could add up the name recognition of everyone, including Ngannou, on the PFL roster, and it doesn't match what those guys have.
But if you have a Netflix subscription, which I do, and let's say you're sitting home on that night and you're not doing anything, and they got the Paul versus Tyson ad, you have no interest in watching it, but you might watch it. You're one
Yeah,
of the millions and
yeah,
millions of subscribers that have it. They only need like
PFL.
a small fraction of their subscribers to watch it to have like millions and millions of people.
I understand. I understand. It'll be something. I don't hang my hat on them making deals that are good because they have no record of making good deals.
Right. Yeah. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting because, like I said, I was a big fan of that product. I wish they would just do it on. Hopefully, they're watching the show. Do it on Thursday or Friday. Saturday, forget about it. You know, Friday only, Thursday only. Pick one. Pick one of those two. Do it then. You know, and like Bjorn Rebney did.
Yeah.
No,
It's
no.
funny. The more you look back at it, Rebney was probably the best competition for Dana. We know he was kind of a high energy person. Um, and he could be tough on business on the business end and tough on his fighters. The way Dana, when Dana has to come down, he's not shy. And Rebney had a little bit of that. He wasn't as big a personality, media wise as Dana. Um, he made a fatal mistake of, um, trying to. He made the Bill Clinton move, which is he looked and said, "I do not have sexual relationships with that wife or with that woman." And the reason he's able to do that and look at the camera is because he's a lawyer, and he defines in his mind sexual relations as actual intercourse and not what happened. So he's able to try to do a lie and Vulcan mind trick the world into thinking he's correct. And Rebney tried to do that with Eddie Alvarez, and he ran into a street kid who actually went out and got himself a lawyer and fought him on it. And his little mind game didn't work, and it all fell apart from there because he's just. I don't think he was going to recover after that. He didn't look good, and there's no way for him to look good.
Well, PFL's having that problem. They're not looking good now because a lot of their best fighters are asking to be let go.
Yeah, no. PFL, even when they were WSOF, they weren't looking good. you know. And I enjoyed some of the WSOF guys. I think David Branch was a good fighter.
Hmm.
He had some time in the UFC where he was
Marias
looking.
was good. Yeah,
Yeah, so
they had
they
some
had
good
some interesting guys here and there, just like
Gaethje.
the PFL. The PFL had Kayla and a couple other people like that pop up and stuff, but not enough. Not enough. The UFC goes from 800 fighters on the roster, and when they trim, they get down to about 600. That's about the same as NFL's roster of people. You have to have a constant wave of stars. The NFL, NBA rather, the NBA can survive. For example, if Stephen Curry gets injured and is gone for the year, if LeBron James gets injured and is gone for the year, they still have stars in every city because play all the time and it's developed. It's just different development of the sport, but that's the idea. Is if you have two or three people of interest, if something happens to those two or three people of interest, like Ngannou not fighting, like Kayla Harrison going to the UFC at the end of the day, what in the world does the PFL product look like, and what are they going to actually sell?
Yeah, gonna be interesting to see. Yeah,
All right,
as
bro.
always, like I think it's a great thing to end on. I wanna. As always, I thank Miguel for coming on these shows. He's done so many of these with me. He's always got great insights. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, we appreciate if you subscribe and share the shows with people. Get the word out there. And like the shows. It helps with the YouTube algorithm and whatnot. And we always appreciate your support. And be on the lookout for future episodes. Take care.
Up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms. The House Call Sports on YouTube. The Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.